Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here at the Museum of Care. I've been watching it kind of from a distance and the emails, but I've been so busy I haven't had time to really get involved, but I would love to at some point. But I also had a massive burnout where I got my face paralyzed, so I've got to say no to some things. So it's great to see you all there. I'm not at all an expert on the Paris Commune, but it's an event that has kind of flowed through my bones for many, many years as an inspiration. So I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes. And then we can start the party. So first, just really for those who don't, for the comrades here who don't know where I'm coming from, I work with the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination, and it's not what it's described there by the Metropolitan Police as this is not a normal traveling theatre company, you know. Actually, you know, we're not a normal traveling theatre company. What we do though is we bring artists and activists together in kind of self-managed workshops to design new forms of civil disobedience and direct action. And we've been doing that since 2004. It's taken many, many forms. We call all the things experiments because we see the right to failure as key to what we do. That can involve transforming bikes into tools of disobedience during a COP summit, hundreds of bikes, some of which were used as barricades. It can involve turning bikes into pirate radio stations. This is a 5-channel pirate radio station. It can involve a theatre show that ends up in the streets with people putting pheromones of ants into the banks with the audience, and the ants are special ants that sabotage the computers. It can involve setting up the clandestine rebel clown army. It can involve putting things on the benches in the City of London. Can involve designing shields with the victims of climate chaos on them to push through police lines during a climate camp. And these shields themselves some of these objects sometimes end up in museums, as this shield did in the London Victoria and Albert Museum. But that's not at all why we do this. In fact, that's not the point at all. We don't do this for museums. We do this for social change. And this is where we come to the Commune in a way, because for me, the Paris Commune shows us a kind of moment of crisis. And in a time of crisis, what do artists do? You know, in this moment where we have to have new civilizational models, this similar edge era, what choice do artists have? Well, you know, there's those who continue business as usual, representing the world, doing what our comrade Brian Holmes called pictures of politics. And then there are those that desert the art world to apply imagination to radical movements. And this is kind of what I'm going to talk about in terms of the Commune. So how to imagine Paris 150 years ago. I haven't got time to go into the roots and the context, and I'm sure all of you probably know way more than I do about the Commune. But it was an era not unlike our own. It was a kind of edge era. It was this kind of edge between industrial financial capitalism as we know it and a kind of post-French Revolution that had been seen to fail, early modern pre-fossil fuel bourgeois society. So it was on this kind of edge. And 150 years ago tonight, as we speak, no, it was in the morning, sorry, the extraordinary poet and teacher Louise Michel is running through the streets of Montmartre, and she's announcing to the people that the state is coming to take away the cannons of the National Guard. And the crowd arrive, mostly women, and they block the way for the cannons to be taken away. The cannons aren't taken away, they stay in the hands of the people, and the insurrection begins. Now, the word commune had been on the lips of people for months. There had been revolutionary clubs open, there had already been insurrections in other places, in other cities, not Paris beforehand, Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse. So the spirit was already there. And it was a spirit of a total rupture from the old world, really, a call for a universal social and a democratic republic. And it was a kind of blast, an insurrectionary blast that lasted nearly the whole spring. The Situationists called it the greatest festival of the 19th century. And it was a kind of resistant carnival where bodies reinvented themselves and new forms of life were acted out. And for 72 days, Paris became an autonomous commune, self-managed according to the principles of cooperation and association. It was really about testing the possibilities of living differently in a crisis-riddled present, which is very similar to many of the Occupy, many of the kind of utopian anarchist movements we've seen in this century. There were parties held to burn guillotines, and many things that the French society now take for granted were tested there, such as free education, social housing, kindergartens, creches. All those things actually were first tested during the Commune. But it ended on the 28th of May, and on the last week, which there was about 30,000 killed in the streets and of Paris, killed and shot by the government, who were desperate to wipe radicalism from the so-called City of Light. But what were the artists doing during the time of the Commune? So most of them, most of the Impressionists, the so-called painters of modern life, including Morisot, Cézanne, Monet, they escaped Paris. They deserted the city, they deserted the insurrectionary city, and they took refuge in seaside cottages, rural retreats, and many continued to paint. They painted portraits, they painted landscapes, they painted silent couples sitting at tables, they painted bunches of flowers. But there were other artists who decided not to leave and not desert the insurrectionary city. And artisans. In fact, the Commune, a lot of research shows that actually one of the majorities of the communards, many were artisans, craftspeople, and artists. Some even called it a shoemaker's revolution. And one of the shoemakers, this character called Napoleon Gaillard, he decided to apply craft to the insurrection. He was a famous shoemaker. He actually was the inventor of rubber galoshes. He was the author of a book called The Art of the Shoe, and he became obsessed with building barricades. And he joined the Barricade Commission, and his entire creative being gave attention to the details of barricade making. He considered them works of art, works of luxury. Here's a photo of one of his barricades. It was a two-story barricade with trenches, and he was there were even photos of him next to the barricade as a way of kind of signing it as his work of art. This one was nicknamed Guillard's Castle. Other artists who remained, more famously, Gustave Courbet. So Courbet was convinced that the Commune was a kind of prefigurative embodiment of the ideas of his friend and the founder of modern anarchist theory, Proudhon. Courbet was already very famous. He famous for his realism, famous for depicting the poor. And he put his paintbrushes down and he immersed himself in organizing. And his art became the organization of a new kind of city. He wrote to his parents at one point during the Commune. He said, "I'm up to my neck in politics. Paris is a true paradise. No police, no nonsense, no acceptation of any kind, no arguments. Everything in Paris rolls along like clockwork. If only it could stay like this forever. In short, it is a beautiful dream. All the government bodies are organized federally and run themselves." And Courbet, together with 400 other artists and craftspeople and artisans, on the 13th of April, filled an amphitheater at the Sorbonne, and they founded what was called the Federation of Artists. And they called this a rallying cry of artistic intelligence. And they published a manifesto. It's France, the long manifesto publishing tradition. And the manifesto broke down the divisions between art and craft, between manual and intellectual labor. And as one of the artists present said, he described it many years later, he said, the manifesto propositions were enormous, not because they elevated the artistic level, but because they spread art everywhere. So it really tried to expand what Joseph Beuys many years later would call expanding the notion of art, so that every worker could be an artist. And not only take, as Morris would say, Morris's definition would be, art is the pleasure of life. Art is the moment when your labor becomes pleasurable. and when you're not, it's not under the dictatorship of a market. But there's also the idea that workers should have time for writing poetry, for making art, and for dreaming. And the last lines of the manifesto read, "We will work cooperatively towards our regeneration, the birth of communal luxury, future splendors, and a universal republic." And this was a demand that beauty flourished in common spaces, what we've now called public art. But at the time, you know, the idea was that beauty was not just in the private, specialized places of the bourgeoisie. And as Kristen Ross, who, if you haven't read this magnificent book called Communal Luxury, the Political Imaginary of the Commune, as she says, the aim of communal luxury was really also to integrate art fully into everyday life. And these ideas had already been a bit present during the Commune, notably by one incredible communard, geographer, anarchist, Elisée Reclus. And in his short piece, Art for the People, he says, if the painters and sculptors were free, there would be no need for them to shut themselves up in salons. They would have but to reconstruct our cities, first demolishing these ignoble cubes of stone where human beings are piled up rich and poor, the beggar and the pompous millionaire, starvelings and satiated victims and hangmen. They would burn all the old barracks of the time of misery in an immense fire of joy, and imagine that in the museums of works to be preserved, they would not leave very much of the pretended artistic work of the time. A few weeks after the writing of the manifesto, the Federation of Artists designed something that Marx would later describe an act that broadly marked the new era of history that the Commune was conscious of initiating. And the Federation of Artists decided to pull down this column. It's called the Vendôme column. It was made from thousands of pieces of melted Prussian cannons. It had a golden statue of Napoleon on the top, dressed up as a Roman emperor. And it was a monument to hierarchy and to war, to empire. Nothing to do with these ideas of internationalism, solidarity, and horizontality, which were key to the Commune. So the Federation decided they were going to pull it down. Originally, Courbet got a bit scared and he said, we'll just dismantle it. He had a term déboulonner, which is still used in French to take down monuments. And in a kind of pre-situationist act of détournement, of hacking, he had the idea that they would take it down and then re-site it outside the military hospital for the French soldiers. Whenever they came out, they would see, and what he said, there at least the invalids could see where they got their wooden legs. So I was showing them that war was there, and that's why they had their legs blown off. But the Federation decided that they would actually bring it down. And it was an incredible festival, designed like a revolutionary festival, this moment. They wrote invitations. 20,000 people came to watch it coming down. They played, the bands played music. And at the end they were going to rename the square the International Square, and put a book in its place that had the names of all the communal citizens in. 6 days later, the Republican troops, the government troops, broke through the barricades and they began the massacre. And this 3-month-long experimentation with new forms of life ended in a week of ruthless killings. As I said, between 8,000 and 30,000 communards were killed. Many were summarily executed, and martial law was declared, and the martial law lasted for 5 years. And what happened? The Impressionists came back to town just afterwards, and Manet, shocked by the repression and critical of what he considered to be the Commune excesses, wrote, "We have all been complicit. This war has ruined me for several years to come." And meanwhile, the British travel agency Thomas Cook organizes trips for British people to come to Paris to see the ruins of the Commune, the ruins of Paris, because they claimed it was nearer than Pompeii and it rivaled the ruins of Pompeii. And exactly 2 years, 24 months after the Commune, what happens? The first Impressionist exhibition opens. And it revolutionizes painting. And the critics are shocked by the style. They say, oh, they're artists painting with stones rather than paintbrushes. But in fact, the shock aesthetic was just masking the horror of the Commune. In fact, French society needed to forget the Commune. They needed to have a cultural amnesia. That was the order of the day. And maybe today we would call this a form of art washing. So you can see there, 1872, Monet. Art washing is this magical sleight of hand that transforms radical art into a tool for upholding the status quo. And so suddenly the free and liberated crowd of the Commune was erased. It was erased by portraits of isolated individuals. The streets stained with death were washed away by the still lives bursting with color, and modern life returned. And with it, the myth of the artist as disengaged, as neutral, as this neutral aesthetic rebel. And the possibilities of the world were reduced again, and a bifurcation closed on itself. And all those new forms of social life that arose during the Commune, the heated debates. This is a beautiful picture of one of the churches that became the Club of Women, with women in the pulpit. All those new forms of life, the debates in the clubs, the requisitioning of empty buildings that were transformed into public housing, the first public housing ever in France, the expropriated workshop turned into worker-owned cooperatives, the demands for female suffrage, everything withered away like plants brought indoors. And many of these forms would take decades to re-emerge, and many others are still waiting. And so Impressionism had restored the normality of modern life. The city had returned to the rich, returned to the middle classes, to the bourgeoisie. And fearful of taking sides and getting too close to something they couldn't control, the Impressionists had put art in the service as business as usual, in their fear that they had domesticated and erased experiments in new forms of life. And there's an art historian, Albert Bohm, who says modernism, and he says, was built on the desire to hide the guilty secret of the Commune. And so I think we're at a similar point of choice as artists and activists, but especially as artists. Do we continue as business as usual, representing the world, pictures of politics, installations about migration, performances about climate crisis, or do we desert the art world? And do we apply imagination to radical movements? I know which I made, and I'm writing here and speaking from a caravan in an autonomous commune. It's called the ZAD. I haven't got time to talk about it now, but it's called the ZAD, the Zone to Defend. It was built in resistance to a new international airport, where for 6 years on these 4,000 acres of land, there were 70 squats, and we lived without police for 6 years in self-organization. Probably France's biggest commune since 1871. I haven't got time to say how we fought and how we fought against the airport and how we won and how we're still here. We can leave that for another night. But tonight, the lighthouse that we built exactly where they wanted to build a control tower, and it's just over there, I can see it from here, and it will be lit. And we built it where they wanted to put the control tower. And Kristen Ross called our lighthouse at the ZAD, she comes and visits us, she called it a piece of communal luxury, which touched us very deeply. And underneath the lighthouse is a cherry tree that we planted at the end of the carnival for David Graeber. And it's a cherry tree to remember the spring of the commune. And one of the most famous songs linked to the Paris Commune is called The Time of the Cherries. And it ends, I shall always like cherry time, because the memory is one I keep in my heart. Tonight at the ZAD, we've got a party to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Commune. Sadly, I won't be able to stay too long for your party because I'll be going to that party, and it's with real bodies, which I prefer than pixels, sadly. But vive la Commune and happy birthday, TJ.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
Wow, cool.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Il nous faut écouter les temps des cerises.
Ouais.
We
carrément.
have to listen to les temps des cerises.
Mais quelle version?
There's
Yves Montand?
there is an anarchist rock band in Livorno, Italy, that sings this song, and Marco Rovelli wrote a book about this song and Louis Michel. I tried to invite him tonight, but I'm afraid I couldn't make it. And I loved when you said carnival. It was a carnival where bodies were reinventing themselves, and I'm very keen of this relationship between carnival and revolutions, and we started all of this thing with Carnival for David. So could you tell me more about it, or just is somebody as interested as me in this connection here?
Is that Simona, is that a question to me? Or
Yes,
to generally, a generally
yes,
question?
a general, but you can start if you.
I mean, for me, the carnival, well, let's start with carne. The word itself is flesh, you know. For me, all forms of you know, of carnival are always about, you know, to some extent, the body not being in the right place, the body not being the right shape, the body being grotesque, the body taking risks, the body being upside down, the world being upside down, and you know, just the fact that women's bodies were in the pulpits of the churches instead of the male priests, you know, is in itself an incredible carnivalesque act in this moment in carnival where all the binaries are broken. You know, men become women, women become men, slaves become masters, masters become slaves, and so on. And I think, I mean, Lefebvre and the Situationists wrote a lot about, you know, this idea of the Paris Commune being this giant festival. I was involved in Reclaim Streets in the 1990s, and we were inspired by that idea too. And for us, it was how instead of waiting for the insurrection and the revolution to feel like a carnival, to feel like this space where all the hierarchies are dissolved, what would happen if we made carnivals that became revolutions? Could we try and make carnivals that would actually become insurrections? So it was a kind of carnivalesque hacking, turning upside down of the idea of revolutions feeling like carnivals, and saying, well, what happens if we try to, and to some extent, you know, it worked. We were one of the many seeds that created the alter globalization movement in the 90s.
Is it possible to visit the ZAD?
Absolutely, it's a totally open space like anywhere else. Bit harder with COVID because of borders being closed, but absolutely, you're always welcome, and I can share my contacts.
Maybe then I will ask due to this question that I have. So during my Soviet childhood, every school kid would learn Lenin's depiction of Paris Commune, which was very practical. Lenin was talking about how Paris Commune was great, of course, but they were kind of a little bit brain damaged, stupid. So instead of doing certain steps, like, you know, taking money from the bank and, you know, concentrate on protection and militarization, I would say it like that. Instead of this, they started to develop a day-to-day routine, immerse themselves in creating an art and, you know, street lights and so on and so forth. So I think on the 73rd day of Russian Revolution, Soviet Revolution, when it wouldn't be defeated, Lenin went outside and danced, saying like, hey, we lived longer than a Paris Commune, because they didn't believe as well that they're going to survive. So I would talk with David about that, and I think he has a text also about this. So his idea was that actually Paris Commune was very much correct, because if they would go the steps as Lenin prescribed, they will end up exactly as Soviet Union. You know, they would become this militarized organization that would have no chance of being who they are. So for me, like, it always was this kind of strange dilemma of necessity to protect yourself and danger to become similar to your alter ego, like a state. So I don't know what other people think about that. Oh, Jay, what do you think about this?
I mean,
Yeah, because you guys also the similar situation. You have to protect yourself and you do active protection campaigns. But yeah.
well, it's actually quite funny, because actually one of the comrades I live with, so the ZAD is now 40 different collectives, and each collective has, you know, its own life form. And so we have 10 between 10 people, 10 and 15 people here, and one of them is the great grandson of the guy who made the decision in the Paris Commune not to attack the bank. So he's not which is quite funny. I mean, I'm sure there are people there in the room who maybe have better answers. I mean, I think I mean, Lenin's problem with the commune was that it was an attempt at horizontality. I think that's that was the main issue. And you know, I think also, I mean, you have to also realize that the whole of European bourgeois society was also against the commune, you know. So, I mean, they didn't have any help from any other state, you know, they were pretty isolated. And a lot of the critique is also that they didn't make enough links. There were attempted links to make with the countryside, and people tried to make links with the peasants, and that was really stopped a lot. And so in a way, a lot of the soldiers were the peasants, and there was a lot of propaganda that went out telling the soldiers that, you know, the commune was these, you know, disgusting, notably there was a lot of sexism, these women pétroleuses were burning buildings down. It was one of the first uses of the word pétrole, actually, in the common, much used word, the first, you know, it was early days of fossil fuels. I mean, fossil fuels hadn't come in except for lamps, but, you know, there was attempts to make those links, and in a sense, it's also you know, it was a city under siege. I mean, for God's sake, it was a city surrounded by Prussian troops, you know, that had been starving for months and months and months and months. They had to eat the elephants in the zoo because they were so hungry. I mean, the rich got to eat the elephants and the poor got to eat the rats. But I think that idea of isolation is still a very key political question. You know, how do you stop? I mean, they had Prussian troops around them, but how do you stop that? How do you keep a commune in its autonomy and yet in its connection with people? And at the ZAD, we won partly because we made a lot of effort to make those connections, that it wasn't this closed autonomous space, even though the members of parliament at the time said that it was more dangerous to come to ZAD than go to Mosul in Iraq. I mean, that was, you know, they were saying that publicly. So we had to do a lot of work to open up. But I'm sure there are other people there who have good answers.
I was wondering, back in 1871, so Paris might have been surrounded by city walls, right? Is that how they managed to sort of resist you?
It was surrounded by forts and city walls, which are now a motorway. I mean, the ring road is pretty much follows the city walls now. So they were used to some extent to protect from. But in a way, it was a classic. You know, the emperor at the time, the French emperor, basically had seen the revolution coming, and he did a classic, which is like, well, let's make an outside enemy. You know, we don't want to be the enemy anymore, so let's create an outside enemy. And he, you know, they in a sense constructed the war. I mean, they didn't construct it, but they enabled the war against the Prussians to come, because actually it helped the emperor. Well, he thought would help him stay in place, because actually there would be an outside enemy, which happens, the history of revolutions is the state, creating a war to create an outside enemy. I mean, it's no surprise that the anti-globalization movement, biggest anti-capitalist movement, global anti-capitalist movement in the late 20th century, 9/11 happens and the Iraq war comes out, and suddenly terrorism is the issue, and so yeah, I mean, it was a classic.
And I also have two other questions. In the mailing list, it was said that many things were sort of tested and invented back in the Paris Commune, and one of them was like street lighting.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that, but it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, like the day-to-day life of the big city that's taken for granted is really wasn't there before, because they're the guys who actually thought through the city as commonplace. That wasn't there before. So that was so useful for everybody. Like everyone in all the city of the world should now really celebrate Paris Commune, because we would live in a different world without them.
Although it's funny,
yeah.
Although it's funny, there's a commune, one of the biggest communes in Europe and oldest communes in Europe is Christiania, where 1,000 people have lived on squatted land for 50 years now. Now they've legalized it, and they don't have any street lighting in Christiania. Actually, it's in Copenhagen. It's in Copenhagen, and it's interesting. And they say they had this thing that they were offered street lighting, and they said no, because we want to trust each other. We know we can trust each other to walk at night in the street, and we want to see the stars.
Yeah, but actually Christiania also have a lot of this common services, kind of, I don't know, like a little bit maybe different than in France. Like they have these free shops everywhere where the people just bring in stuff that they don't need and everybody can get them. They have a lot of playgrounds. So all this communal space or communal luxury is just developed differently, but in a way in the same direction. I just want to ask you one more question. What can you talk more about your ideas of how to develop a framework for the artist who is not an artist as in a sense of impressionism, but the more artist in the sense of abandoning the artist?
What do you mean by a framework?
I mean, to practice art or any intellectual work, as to live in a city, you need some kind of tools and some kind of infrastructure. Like we are saying that Paris Commune will develop an infrastructure, like street lights, it's an infrastructure, yeah? So if we want to write together, we can write in a different way. We can each write our own text, and then we can edit each other. We can, have one big huge piece of paper and come together to the table and write and draw together. So it could be many different forms, but the forms is very important to defining the content. So now we have academia and art world, that is a framework, and we have some activist art, but they're very marginal, and most of them is still either academia or the art world. Like David, he was an academic, yeah. So his activity as an activist was parallel, and sometimes he paid a price for doing that, but still he was living from academia. And his major intellectual partners and work was in the framework of academia. That he was publishing books and so on. So how, I think it's a very important question, how to reinvent these institutions differently.
Well, I mean, the way I see it, and the way we see it in the Laboratory of Insurrection Imagination is, I mean, both of us who founded the Laboratory of Insurrection Imagination, we both deserted the academy. I was a senior lecturer in fine art. Isabel was a senior lecturer in media studies. And we experienced the neoliberalization of the academy, and we realized that actually we realized there was not space enough anymore in that space to do radical politics. And so we both left our jobs. and were, you know, and for us, the art world is a space where there is public money. We refuse to take money. We refuse to, bless you. We refuse to work in institutions that have corporate money that we see as unethical, so banks or fossil fuel corporations and so on. But we do sometimes get some money from the art world because we see that as public space. And I think there are things you can do in the art world if, only if, you're prepared to lose your cultural capital. If you're prepared to do stuff which will upset people and you're not doing it for your art career, but you're doing it for political reasons, you know, we won't ever get reinvited to several places like the Tate Gallery in London. That's a longer story I won't tell now, but, you know, because we've done things that have upset these worlds. But for me, the main framework is social movements. You know, we've always worked within social movements. So as artists, we go to the social movement and we don't do what we call extractivist art. We don't go to the social movement to go and do videos about riots or, you know, to make installations about the climate movement or the anti-colonial movement or whatever. We go in there and we apply imagination as creative organizers, and we try and get artists and activists together to create new forms of direct action. So for us, the framework is there. It's already there. It's social movements. And for us, that's the material. You know, the material for artists is and should be social movements. It's what, you know, it's what Boyce calls social sculpture. It's you know, that for us is the framework, I think.
I think Anshul had his hand raised for a while, and maybe I can also answer what on this note, JJ, after that, and then Yash.
Yeah, can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, JJ, for the wonderful presentation. I was just thinking about, I mean, the various social malice that Paris was suffering from in that period. Sexuality plays a big role in that. And both thinking of sexuality in Paris before the Commune and after the Commune. And I'm also thinking about sex work and how perhaps that were negotiated in the Commune, because I know, I think post-Commune, sexuality and precisely sex work has been sort of prostitution, and the demoralizing of prostitution has been a key theme of Paris, at least for me, in the 20th century. So how were these ideas negotiated in the Commune? And I'm also thinking about the name carnal, like you said, the flesh and the bodies, and the carnival being this liminal space for bodies. And so just thinking about the role of sexuality in the Commune and how it's negotiated in these spaces, perhaps also the role that it plays in ZAD, and how you know, the role that queer community and other forms of sexually oppressed people have in these politically liminal spaces. That's all.
I think this question was for you, JJ.
Okay, do you want to go afterwards then, Anka?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a brilliant question, and I have absolutely no idea. As I said, I'm not an expert on the Commune, and I should know about this, and I don't. Well, here we go. Yash, do you want to answer?
I can say just one quick thing, which is like, it's just more of a comment really, like I think Anka recommended this documentary last week called La Commune by Peter Watkins. And it's this really great reenactment of all the events that took place back in 1871. And there's like two fictitious journalists who go on mics, you know, interviewing everyone as the events are happening. So like, I mean, like one thing they mention in the documentary is like this thing called the fifth quarter, where it was more like women were resorting to sex work because they were forced to, because like their 4 shifts at their day jobs and evening jobs and night jobs still weren't enough to make the ends meet. So they had to do that at night, you know.
Yeah, I think during the Commune, from what I don't know much either, but yeah, I think sex work and other women's work in general was beginning to be talked as work as well. And actually, I want to I don't know how many of you have seen this documentary, La Commune. Yash just said a bit about it. So it was made in '99 by Peter Watkins. And it's very interesting because it made me think that what JJ said about the two options, that you can continue with making an image of society as it is, or you can do something more as an action. You can take action. And when I watched this documentary, I felt actually quite activated by it. You know, it was, I will show some snippets from it in a bit. But I thought, so how it was made. So it was made in '99, and in this abandoned factory in East Paris. It was filmed only in 13 days, and it's like a 6 hours documentary. And majority of the actors were actually non-professional, and they were seen as co-producers, so as participants in the documentary. No, it's not a documentary, it's a docudrama. Someone asked in the in the chat. So basically reimagining history, and the actors were citizens themselves with their own political views. So when they chose people to play the bourgeoisie who stayed in the commune, because some of them actually stayed to defend their businesses, they chose people, they hired actors, or again, amateurs, who were who had more conservative views. And then they chose people from outside Paris who are more lefties now. And when you watch it, you actually don't even, sometimes you don't know when is it about past, you know, when is it history, or when is it happening now? And maybe I can show some clips if you, I don't know if people want that. Yeah. Do you want to give me the?
You have.
Yeah. I do?
You have.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this one is basically about when, yeah, just I think this was very similar to what we've been initially talking at Museum of Care, like how to organize ourselves. So I'll play this, it's just like 3 minutes.
Moi, l'excuse, il met chacun devant sa propre responsabilité. La commune, c'est nous qui l'avons faite. C'est à nous de la défendre. Le comité de salut public. Donc, je sais pas, il met chacun devant sa responsabilité dans la commune, effectivement, mais il n'en demeure pas moins que c'est quand même un pouvoir centralisé dont il fait partie.
Et c'est le deuxième comité de salut public. Le deuxième, qu'est-ce qui se passe réellement? Nous, les gens du sous-comité, on les soutient parce que c'est le populaire, c'est ça qu'on cherche depuis. Mais il y a une contradiction quelque part, c'est dans la hiérarchie qu'on nous oppose tous les jours. Et tous ces gens qui manipulent, qui centralisent le pouvoir et qui donnent des ordres, et ces ordres-là, aller se faire tuer sur les champs de bataille sur des erreurs de tactique. Qui mène vraiment la danse dans cette histoire? Est-ce que c'est nous? Est-ce que c'est le comité de salut public? Est-ce que ce sont les sous-comités qui mènent la danse?
C'est à nous de reprendre le pouvoir. La commune nous appartient. Justement, elle est en train de nous échapper. Mais non, on peut agir. Chacun peut agir. Il faut arrêter de déléguer son autorité et son pouvoir sur les autres.
Alors, on agit ensemble depuis le début, on la défend la commune. Je veux dire, il faut bien à un moment organiser les choses, on ne part pas chacun tout seul dans son coin. À un moment, il faut concentrer un peu les efforts, quoi. Je suis désolé, tu dis qu'on soutient le sous-comité, moi je ne soutiens pas le sous-comité. Il fout le bordel depuis le début. Toutes les tentatives qu'il y a eu pour réorganiser la garde nationale, alors on peut les critiquer, on peut voir les options qui ont été choisies, mais enfin, à chaque fois, il y a quand même le comité central qui est là pour donner les comptes d'ordre et puis qui se retrouvent aussi dans le sous-comité.
Tu veux dire que les gens qui sont du sous-comité, les gens qui ont été placés au sous-comité, qui sont dans les quartiers, ces mecs-là, tu ne reconnais pas leur autorité?
Je reconnais qu'ils sont là, ils ont fait l'insurrection avec nous, je les connais, enfin, je veux dire, ils ont de la valeur, mais à un moment, pour les affaires militaires, on est en guerre, merde, il faut gagner la guerre. Quoi.
Oui, mais ils étaient avec
il faut concentrer l'énergie, il faut dire, les ordres, ils sont forcément centralisés.
Moi, je veux bien avoir de l'énergie, je veux bien jouer le héros, mais c'est un peu flou, quoi.
C'est complètement flou, il n'y a pas de
cohérence, il n'y a pas de stratégie.
Ouais,
on ne sait pas quoi faire.
Ah, qu'on nous dit ça, qu'on nous dit la stratégie, elle peut-être se mettre en route si on arrête de foutre le bordel partout avec des organisations. Est-ce qu'il n'est pas plus facile de prendre des décisions quand c'est centralisé dans une situation d'urgence comme celle qu'on vit en ce moment, que d'attendre que les décisions soient dispersées, que les ordres, que les contre-ordres qui arrivent un peu de n'importe où, du comité de service public, du sous-comité, à votre avis?
On a encore renoncé au pouvoir que l'a donné la commune.
C'est peut-être vrai,
Le
mais
18 mars, c'est nous qui étions à
la situation l'impose.
On n'a pas à déléguer comme ça. On n'a pas à renoncer. La commune a renoncé à son pouvoir, à ses prérogatives, à ses pouvoirs de décision.
Okay, that's one of them. Can you still hear me? I'm so confused about this.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And
Thank you.
yeah, so I want to show also this one, which is basically when the people took over and they took the Hotel de Ville. That was like their main headquarters of the commune. And there is this amazing scene where women go from door to door asking so that they can have some space where they can talk about their own problems. And people tell, oh, we have no space, go in the other building. And then, no, we want to be in the same building as you. So I thought this is also quite relevant. Maybe it's also 3 minutes.
La commune, c'est aussi, c'est pas la commune des femmes ou des hommes, c'est une refonte d'une nouvelle société qui serait plus proche des aspirations du peuple, des travailleurs, tout ça. Est-ce que c'est pas, alors que le travail des femmes, il n'a pas émergé hier, il a toujours existé, un moyen, ce travail de reconnaissance sociale de la place dans la société, aux côtés des hommes, par contre, ou ensemble, quoi, juste. Ben, c'est là, c'est pas une excentricité, c'est une réalité, c'est une nécessité aussi. C'est un moyen déjà pour l'instant survivre, mais c'est surtout, moi je pense, à un moyen pour aller vraiment vers autre chose. Puisque pour l'instant on n'a rien, il faut tout créer. Donc il faut aussi que les gens puissent apprendre d'autres métiers, sortir de tous ces métiers dans lesquels on confine les femmes, leur ouvrir d'autres ouvertures. Mais moi, je tiens beaucoup aussi à ce que les femmes puissent s'exprimer sur le niveau artistique. Et là, pour l'instant, les femmes sont coupées de toute création. Et vraiment, je pense qu'on peut créer avec nos associations des associations qui prennent les femmes en charge pour leur ouvrir d'autres horizons, pour leur apprendre à connaître des auteurs, pour leur apprendre à faire d'autres choses avec leurs mains et avec leur vie, que de travailler pour gagner, pour survivre.
Yeah, that's
wonderful.
what I wanted to share. And yeah, like JJ said, it was actually women who convinced the soldiers to not take the cannons. So it kind of, they sort of started the commune. Yeah, Nika?
Who will meet it? Yeah. So I want to return to my question about art and revolution. And I also think that it's a little danger that is not applied to your work, DJ, because you are living in that and you have a day-to-day experience with the people who your comrades, like their neighbors and so on. But in general, if the artists will become only a part of the social movements, that will, I think, unavoidably lead to instrumentalization of art. In this case, art, I mean, not some kind of realm where you develop some sacred, valuable for itself story, but as a place of freedom and play, because social movements is like they have a real very practical goals, and they have to have them in order to save us and to save the world. Like look at Extinction Rebellion, for example, or like when Corbyn campaign Momentum. So many people died because Corbyn wasn't, didn't win. So I think artists could be very helpful in that regard, but it should not be only one aim of the artists or of just free people. So yeah, I believe in the commune what they did, they by not kind of, by doing contradictory to what Lenin said later on about them, they actually create a space for the art being, or the culture being means by itself, means in itself. So.
I mean, yeah, this is the key question. I mean, I think art is always instrumentalized. I mean, any art that is produced under capital and the market is instrumentalized by capitalism and the market. I mean, Morris, who was a big influence for the Fédération des Artistes, for me had the best definition of art, which was, it is the pleasure of labor. It's the moment. He got his ideas from Fourier. Fourier was a big influence on the Commune as well. His idea of passionate attraction, that people should be free to be passionate about the activity they do and find pleasure in the labor that they do. For me, that's the definition of art we should have now. I would extend it. Alan Capero talked about art is simply paying attention. It's paying attention to what you do, whether that's making your food for your comrades, it's whether it's designing a website, whether it's making your garden, whether it's putting the layout of city streets, making love, whatever. It's giving attention to something, a deep attention. And one has to remember the concept of art as a thing separate from everyday life. The concept of art as a thing that is not meant to be useful is really recent, 1750. I mean, there's a great book, this book, I love this book. It's called The Invention of Art. And he says, art is a Western, colonial, white, European invention around 1750 in the metropolis that's pushed to be kind of seen as this universal thing that was made. This invention was so that you broke that you had art as something that the kind of Kantian idea that you step back, you look at this thing. So art was no longer useful. It no longer inhabited a place. It no longer inhabited a certain time. It became this floating thing. Before, there was no division between, he says it's a violent separation between craft and art, between usefulness and beauty, between genius and skill. It's all these divisions that we see now. And for me, a post-capitalist art is one where art, everyday life, and politics come together, and when art it becomes useful again. And so this idea of freedom and play in art, I mean, I think every form of practice should have freedom and play in it, whether it's art or activism or whatever. And for me, freedom isn't something that's disconnected. Freedom is fundamentally, I'm free because I'm connected to others. I'm free because I'm connected to my food. I'm free because of links, not because of being this kind of neoliberal individual that's able to do what they want.
Yes, totally agree.
Yes, I had a question. It's not directly relevant to like what we were just talking about, but I guess, I mean, it's kind of ironic that I think just this week, I think in the UK, they passed this law in which peaceful protest is punishable with up to 10 years in prison. UK says that it's a democracy. So, I mean, I feel like for someone like me, who's very new to this world of like, I guess, like activism and being like taking practical action on the streets, for example, news like these is like it creates a lot of hopelessness, and like I'm never sure how seriously such laws should even be taken in the first place, So like, I guess JJ, in your case, I guess you've had like extensive experience with direct actions. You've done work, like you've been part of the alter globalization movement, and I'm sure like similar laws were there back then, and in Paris as well. Like after the Commune, there was 5 years of martial law. So I guess I'm just wondering how we should see these laws, how threatened we should be feeling by them, and how we can still be hopeful, I guess,
I mean, yeah, they always put these laws in when they feel threatened, basically. So they're kind of a sign that we're winning every time. So that's, I mean, I was in movements which were created out of the most repressive, probably the most repressive law since before the new one that came in, which was called the Criminal Justice Act of 1994, which basically even brought a musicologist into the British Parliament to define techno music, because it was basically against all forms of subculture. So they defined techno music as music defined by a repetitive beat, and it was then illegal to play techno music to more than 10 people outside. And the movement I was in was directly out of that, because they also criminalized direct action out of that. So, you know, that law came in 94, and we thought, oh, that's it, it's all over. But, you know, I mean, stuff continued, and there wasn't actually as much repression as we thought, especially in terms of the direct action bits of the law. I mean, that's you know, that was a long time ago now. You know, of course, everywhere. I mean, in France, I live in France with incredibly violent police who are completely able to do what the fuck they want, take people's eyes out with rubber bullets regularly, and they get, you know, they're never taken to court. At least in Britain, you can still take the cops to court. And in one way, a lot of activists in Britain used to make their living, and I don't know if that's still the case now, but I think it is that you would take your cops to court after an illegal arrest, and, you know, you'd get 10 grand or something, and you'd live for a year on that, because there's no real social, you know, good social benefits in Britain. Yeah, I mean, keeping hope. Yeah, for me, I just have to keep believing that, yeah, they bring these laws in when we're winning, which I think is true.
Maybe somebody wants to read the question from to JJ.
Yeah, okay. So Phoebe asked, she heard mic doesn't work. Can JJ expand on the distinctions made between the Paris Commune between art and craft? Craft, unlike art, an unmarked term which splits physical objects from what the word art is thought to include, extends person into object. So you might say craft resists capitalist logics, except as you say everything can be art if it is for enjoyment, for its own sake. But then to complicate the picture further, a lot of the artifacts labeled art in other cultures, I'm thinking particularly of Haiti at the moment, and the revolutionary art there, is not considered art by its creators. The objects are writ as ritual subject. Artisans, interestingly, played a very important role in the revolution there, in subsistence production for autonomy. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what is the usefulness of saying we are all artists for revolutionary purposes, bearing in mind the term is based in the European aesthetic tradition, but at the same time, ends there, I believe. Oh, speak to universal truth that we all create stuff and images are personal agents. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's an incredible question. And also, thank you so much for telling us about what's going on in Haiti and that role in Haiti. Well, let's go. I mean, the core, well, two things. One, enjoyment for itself, for the sake of itself. I think Morris, from my understanding of Morris, it wasn't enjoyment for the sake of itself, because it was in a non-dualistic society where the self and the self was fundamentally linked to the common, and so it was always enjoyment for the self, which had to have some role in making the whole work better. It's the same as an ecosystem. You know, each species in an ecosystem develops its own subjectivity, but only within the scope of enabling the ecosystem within which it inhabits to work better. So it's a kind of non-dualistic idea of self and other, and so I think, you know, that's one thing. The other thing is, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the term artists is a Western European thing. I'd love to get rid of it. Actually, I think you're right. I mean, I think the most revolutionary thing is, you know, there used to be a T-shirt that said "Kill all artists," which I quite liked. I think the most revolutionary thing is to no longer use that term. And maybe, you know, I think talking about a discipline of attention. I mean, the Invisible Committee in call communism a discipline of attention. And I think art is also a discipline of attention. So maybe we could just replace the word art with a discipline of attention. But then some of us don't like the word discipline.
Can I ask a quick question, please?
Sure.
Thank you, JJ, first for the presentation. I have a quick two questions regarding the Commune relation to nationalism, and more specifically to the Prussian present in Paris at the time. And I was wondering, how did the common members imagine the Prussian at the time? Were they able to transcend this nationalistic age in which they emerged, and to imagine maybe a cooperation with Prussian or German-speaking communes? That would be maybe the first question. And the second, what was the place of religion and the church in their ideology?
Kristen Ross speaks really well about that in the first chapter. I think it's which is called "Beyond the Cellular Regime of Nationality" of her book. And from what I remember, I mean, she says, it was fundamental. It was the Workers' International that started the Commune. That was one of the key parts of the Commune. So there was an internationalism and a kind of universalism at the foundation of it. One of the first things they did is they actually foreigners didn't have to have papers and stuff like that in the city, so they were very open to foreigners. So it was really seen, and a lot of people from different other struggles came in the way that people go to Rojava now, or people went to Spain in '36. People came from all over Europe to fight for the Commune. So it was really internationalist, and it said Paris is no longer the capital of France. That was a key idea. Paris is a commune. It's an autonomous being. It's not the capital of France. So there was an anti-national. It was there was a certain anti-nationalism, according to Kristen Ross. That's what Kristen Ross's introduction, which is great. In terms of religion, the French left at the time and was incredibly anti-clerical. It was an very strong anti-clerical movement. The division of church and state was important. Churches were reappropriated. They didn't go as far as some of the French revolutionaries had done in terms of the iconoclasm of against the churches and so on. But yeah, it was definitely an anti-clerical, very strong anti-clerical movement.
I think they invented the first secular schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it was not before. The whole school was run by the church. That's why everybody in the world now have to thank them for the secular education. We wouldn't have them. So that's also was very internationalist move, because imagine if every kids in the world go to a religious school, that's automatically they kind of immerse in the respective national belief system, so on.
And during the in terms of the nationalism, and during the not all Paris were communards, and so during the La Semaine Sanglante, the bloody weeks at the end, the state actually distributed brassard, what do you call things you put around your arm? Armbands, tricolor armbands, red, white, and blue armbands of the French flag, to the anti-communards, and the people with those flags on their arms would then go in their neighborhood and point out all the communards in the neighborhood, so that they would get shot. So that the flag was really seen as the anti-commune thing. It was the red flag and the black flag.
Yeah, and I believe that in the resistance there were also not just Parisians, right? That there were some Polish people who had who had the experience from the uprisings back then in Poland, so they applied their knowledge, and then also people from North African backgrounds, which was used by the right-wing propaganda. You know, these are the foreigners who are trying to lead you into, this is not a real movement led by Parisians.
Still the case, huh?
Exactly.
Still the case.
The
You know,
same
in
story.
France, every time there's a riot, the press say, "Oh, the Germans, they were trained in Germany."
Yeah.
Lots of Russians were in Paris Commune too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the incredible, what was her name?
Beautiful woman,
oh,
right?
She was incredible.
Yeah, a lot of beautiful women. Elizabeth.
Yeah, what was her name again?
I remember only first name. Sorry, very bad with names. But
as usual, women are deleted from the history, so we don't know their names.
Dimitriev.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can I make one last question, JJ? Just wondering how is the economy in ZAD? Like, do you basically like consume everything that you plant, etc., or do you have like, I don't know, how is it?
Mm-hmm. It's very complex and mixed. There's never any idea of being self-sufficient. One, it wouldn't be possible, and two, it's not desirable because it cuts you off. So there's lots of links, and the ZAD was fundamentally one of the main forces of the ZAD were the links with peasant farmers on the zone and outside of the zone. So keeping links with peasant farmers outside the zone was incredibly important. And so, for example, some things were fairly sustainable. Bread, I mean, there's bakeries, there's 3 bakeries, running bakeries that work. So, you know, there's always bread. There's cheese, there's some vegetables, but not enough vegetables for everyone all the time. There's honey, there's beer, but not enough beer for everyone all the time. So, you know, we also get donations, people also go to shops. It's very mixed, but if you have no money at all, you know, there are people who live here with very, 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 very little money, and who manage to survive. But the key is to create a kind of common, there's kind of cooperative systems that have been set up, but there are other systems that are not part of the cooperative system. Everything used to be, and it's still kind of the case, but free price, so by donation only. And sometimes that works. With beer, it doesn't work because people get more and more drunk and then they don't want to pay for their beer. And then with free price, it doesn't work. So new things are invented. There's a system that's often used at parties, which is probably going to be, which is where you pay for the barrel of beer collectively. And then when the barrel is gone, people go, okay, the barrel's gone, we've got to pay for the next barrel. And then everyone puts the money in for the barrel. And then once the barrel's paid, the barrel is then reused. So it kind of communalizes the beer, which is quite nice.
And do some people like have day jobs and such?
Mm-hmm.
Or...
Yeah, some people are on benefits. We have good benefits in France. Some people are on day jobs. Some people get the money from the farm work they do. It's really, there isn't a one way. It's really very, very diverse. Yeah.
It's interesting, like in Christiania, people
but
also.
But the idea is, you know, to try and not to be autonomous from money, but to try and, you know, try and be as autonomous, at least dependent on money and market systems. But one of the ways we were repressed, because there was a victory against the airport in January 2018, and so the Prime Minister went on TV and said the airport is now over after 40 years of struggle. There's no airport, but then in the same breath said, but the illegal squatters will be evicted. And they will be evicted by March, by spring. And then in April, the next April, a few months later, the biggest police operation since May 68 in France came, and they fired 11,000 tear gas grenades and basically destroyed 40 of our houses. And that was a kind of revenge for the fact that we lived without the state and we had fought against the airport, but is also a way of forcing us into legalization and into the market systems. And so we were then forced to fill in forms to legalize. Some communities didn't fill in the forms, and then the cops came back with the tanks and the drones and they destroyed their houses. And then it was clear, like, you know, you've got to legalize. So now they're trying to use kind of market structures to force us to legalize, which we are doing, but we're trying to hack them. So it's all, you know, it's always hacking and DIY and, you know, yeah, bricolage is what we call it in French.
Yeah, and last thing, there's always a last thing after the last thing. Do you feel like, is it many people, and are you all kind of in the same level of, sort of friendship and decision making, and really like struggling together? Or is it a bit like, individuals sort of that, and some of them are fighting together or working together, and some of them are just doing their own stuff? Or how is it?
Like all the best utopias, it's a total mess. There have been huge conflicts, especially around the legalization. There were huge conflicts around the strategies against the airport. There are some people who live pretty much individualistic lives here, and there are other people who live 20 people in a house, and they share all their money, and they share their childcare and everything, and there's everything in between. During the struggle itself, there were people who were against, who were radical vegans, and they were living next to farmers who were dairy farmers for 7 generations on the land. And then there were, anarchists working with people who were ex-mayors, mayoresses. There were people who were against all technology, living next to people who wanted to have communal combine harvesters to do the wheat for the bakeries for the whole community. We were at the peak 400 people in 70 different collectives, and now we're about 180 in 30 different collectives. And as for the style of clothing, no. That's your question. Is there a style or expression in the dress, Zad, that you've noticed or participated in? No, they're different. You've got punks, you've got hippies, you've got normcore, you got a bit queer, you got farmers in farmers blue. There's no style.
JJ, is there much cooperation between the Zads and the Yellow Vest movement?
It's a very interesting question. There was collaboration, and it took us all by surprise, and that was what was beautiful about the Yellow Vest movement. There were lots of references to the Commune as well during the Yellow Vest movement, but it totally took us by surprise. There's folks from there's the term ZAD, then it means zone to defend, and it was a hacking of a term for the urbanism term, and other ZADs have developed, and notably there is a place that there are some other ZADs who were more involved than us to some extent, especially in pushing it towards the more federalist communal forms. So there was a big push towards federalism within the Yellow Jacket movement that was kind of led by people linked to the ZADs and linked to our ZADs and stuff. We would give, do a lot of, food is very important on the ZAD, banquets are very important, and we would go and give breakfast sometimes to the Yellow Jackets on the roundabouts and so on. What was funny is that the politicians afterwards, especially the same politician who had said that the ZAD was more dangerous than Mosul in Iraq, years later when the Yellow Jackets happened, which was after the victory against the airport here, was like, and now look, the ZAD is even in the Champs-Élysées. How terrible is that? And he was referring to the riots in the Champs-Élysées. And there was a kind of echo, but it was of the ZAD in the fact that there were cabins on the roundabouts, and it was taking space with cabins and so on. But that was self-managed through the practice of, if you've got a roundabout and you want to occupy it, you're going to build a cabin out of pallets. It wasn't necessarily, oh look, the Zaddists, one of the images of the Zaddists was the cabin out of pallets. But but there was work done, locally. There was a Maison du Peuple, a people's house that was a squatted in one of the local towns in Saint-Nazaire, that was squatted by the Yellow Jackets. So we went and showed them how to connect the electricity and do legal stuff around squatting laws and stuff like that. So, there was a culture of resistance that we helped out with to some extent. But it did overtake us, as the real popular movements always do overtake the professional revolutionaries.
Shall we start the party?
Yeah.
I had shall I put the song that I was going to suggest to start the party?
Yes.
You've got to think of the Vendôme column. Let me see.
The toppled statues?
The toppling of the Vendôme column when you listen. Of the Vendôme column, etc. Let me get the song up. Sorry, I should have prepared this. I didn't. You hear that?
Yeah.
You have to share your audio, I think.
Now is not the time to mumble. Scream it out and feel the rumble. System make it crumble. Kick a column, watch it tumble. Now is not the time to move. Scream it out and feel it rumble. Fuck the system, make it crumble. I don't wanna be fucking treated like that. You don't wanna be fucking treated like that. No one wants to be fucking treated like that. No one wants to be fucking treated like that. Grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this. Suck the line, take the bitter, uncomfortable, not a quitter. Suck the line, take the bitter, uncomfortable, not a quitter. Build it up, wake up, build it up, wake up, build it up, wake up, build it up, wake up. I don't wanna be fucking treated like that. You don't wanna be fucking treated like that. No one wants to be fucking treated like that. No one wants to be fucking treated like that. Grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this, grip this, flip this, whip this, strip this. We are the ones, filter through, seek and destroy, build new. We are the boys, coming through. We can't abide, bring the truth. We are the
There we go. Well, happy birthday, TJ.
Yeah, happy birthday, TJ.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll get the candles now. Did anyone else get something?
Have a candle.
Lying around?
Bring a candle to one.
Okay, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Is nobody else drinking? Ah, okay. Thank you, Steve. Cheers.
I have an empty glass of Coke here, so
You're still at work, Yash.
yeah, that's the thing. It's, I don't even know if it's visible, but
Yeah, you should sell. You should break webcams and sell them to have this really cool effect.
I know, it was amazing.
Yeah, like I think now is the right time to turn it on. Like, because I feel like, yeah, like it's like it has a mind of its own, you know. Like, yeah, it is, yeah, it has its own mind, is all I can say, really.
Should we stop recording or should we record? TJ, your
Does Anka, do you have